Message today is entitled The Darkest Day, and it's springing from these two verses. In him was life, and that life was the light of all mankind. The light shines in the darkness, and the darkness has not overcome it. Have you ever had a dark day? Anybody? Yeah? How about a dark week? A dark month? How about a dark year? How about a dark decade? Have you ever felt like the darkness is winning? Or at least it's going to win? I have. I've felt like that a lot. I've had lots of dark days. I've had lots of difficult times in my life where it felt like the darkness was just going to overwhelm me and take me. Felt like the darkness was winning. Even David in Psalm 10 says that. Something similar. Have you ever wondered, like the psalmist who was David, where is God in times of trouble, in those dark times? Where is he? This is what David says. Why, O Lord, do you stand far away? Why do you hide yourself in times of trouble? That's a prayer. That's a legitimate feeling that David is expressing to God. Where are you? Where did you go? Are you hiding? I'm in trouble. Well, for today's message, it's going to be a little bit different. I need you to turn your imagination on. So it's time to turn your imaginations on, right? Imagination, if you have a little switch, let's switch. Whatever kind of switch it is, let's switch it on. Because I really want us to try to enter the shoes of the people who loved Jesus as they watched the spectacle happen on that dark Friday 2,000 years ago. I know it's really difficult. We can't fully do it because we know what happens. They didn't. But let's do our best to get into their shoes and to feel what they felt. That first Friday, the one we call good, was the darkest of days. It appeared as though the light of the world had been snuffed out, that the darkness had won, that it had finally overcome the light. As the lifeblood of the man known as Jesus slowly drained from his broken body, so too the light of men faded little by little. The man who had given so much hope, so much joy, so much kindness, so much grace, and had displayed so much power and love, now hung from a cross, helpless, weak, struggling just to take his next breath. Where was God? What was he doing? Did he not see? This must have been the questions that plagued the people who loved Jesus and had placed all their hopes in him. What was going on? Where are you, God? It was hard to believe. This man had healed the sick, the lame, the blind, the leper. He had delivered people who were oppressed by evil spirits. And the spirits obeyed him. In fact, they were terrified of him. Thousands. He walked on water. He commanded the waves and wind to stop, and they did. His brilliance was unmatched as he skillfully avoided the traps of the religious leaders and lawyers and left them speechless. Their job was speaking, And he left them speechless. They had nowhere to go. His teaching was like nothing anyone had ever heard before. Mesmerizing, and yet down to earth. Literally. And he taught with an authority that the other rabbis, they didn't have. But what was most impressive about his teaching was that he lived it. Everything that he taught, he lived. He even raised people from the dead. In fact, just a few days ago, he went to the tomb of his recent Where was God? How could this happen? How could God let this happen? How could God allow evil to triumph and darkness to swallow up the most amazing, kind, gentle, loving man who had ever lived? This was truly criminal's death at the hand of Roman soldiers. His own people had given him up. The very religious leaders who should have welcomed him with joy and open arms were the ones who sought to kill him, to end his influence over the people and to appease their envy. The very scriptures they claim to know and follow and teach pointed undeniably to Jesus as the Christ, the Messiah, the one everyone was waiting for. But they led the chanting crowds, "Crucify him, crucify him." Can you imagine? So much anticipation, so much hope, so much potential, so much excitement of what could be, now turned to disappointment, disillusionment, hopelessness, and despair. The dreams of so many died with the man on the cross, or so they thought. Where was God? Even the sun hid its face for 3 hours, as though it could not bear to witness the injustice committed on the hill outside of Jerusalem. He was bruised and battered, unrecognizable to those whom he had shared his life with and walked closely with. The religious leaders gloated and celebrated. The Roman soldiers mocked and tortured him. The people jeered and spit on him. He saved so many. Why can't he save himself, they said. Even one of the criminals crucified beside him reviled him. Even the criminals had contempt for this man. His closest friends abandoned him. Worse yet, they betrayed him and denied they even knew him. He was completely alone, rejected and hill where he would be mercilessly nailed hands and feet to it. I can't help but think that the cross wasn't the heaviest burden. In fact, it was far less of a burden than the other things that Jesus had to carry up that hill. The man of blessing now carried the curse of sin and death, the sin of all humankind upon himself. I can't imagine the weight of it. It was as though God himself was punishing this man. But perhaps the greatest weight of all on this darkest of days was the rejection of the one whom this man had called the most intimate of names, Father. Where was God? How could he allow such injustice to be poured out on such a righteous man? Why didn't he intervene? Why did he not answer the cries and prayers of the people who loved Jesus? They followed mourning, especially the women. The scripture says we're following from a distance, mourning. I can guarantee they were praying over and over and over. Do something, God. Move. Deliver. Help. Don't let this happen. This terrible evil. Mary, his mother, was with them. Can you imagine her prayers? Don't let them take my boy. It was a dark, dark day. There had never been a darker one, nor would there ever be one more darker than this one. Or so they thought. We can only identify with how the people had placed their hope in Jesus to a certain degree when we place ourselves in their shoes. But we can't help but know the outcome. And unless you've never heard the story before, then maybe. But even then, it's really hard. It's plainly seen. This was no cosmic tragedy played out before the heavens. It was God's plan from the beginning that he would become one of us, live with us, display his love and power on us and to us, and then die for us. To pay the penalty for our sin, to become the curse itself, so he could set those whom he loved free. This wasn't a story that should have surprised anyone, really, because it was written 700 plus years before Jesus was born. How the events of this day would work out. But even though it was written in the scriptures, it hadn't been revealed until Jesus came. And so I want to take you to Isaiah chapter 53 and read it. It'll be on the screen here. Who has believed our message, and to whom has the arm of the Lord been revealed? He grew up before him like a tender shoot, like a root out of dry ground. He had no beauty or majesty to attract us to him, nothing in his appearance that we should desire him. He was despised and rejected by mankind, a man of suffering and familiar with pain. Like one from whom people hide their faces, he was despised. He did not open his mouth. By oppression and judgment he was taken away. Yet, who of his generation protested? For he was cut off from the land of the living. For the transgression of my people he was punished. He was assigned a grave with the wicked and with the rich in his death, though he had done no violence, nor was there any deceit in his mouth. Yet it was the in his hand. After he has suffered, he will see the light of life be satisfied. By his knowledge, my righteous servant will justify many, and he will bear their iniquities. Therefore, I will give him a portion among the great, and he will divide the spoils with the strong, because he poured out his life unto death and was numbered with the transgressors. For he bore the sin of many and made intercession for the transgressors. These are dark days. We see it's happening all around us. It's in the news, it's at work, it's in our homes. It's in us. We feel it. The scene that was displayed 2,000 years ago is still playing today. Darkness still threatens to overwhelm us, and we struggle to believe it isn't winning. There's a number of reasons why I think this story is important. We do need to remember, and I love that we set a day aside to do that. But I think one of the most important parts of this story is not just to remember it once a year, but to consider Jesus, what he went through, and to replace usually our hope fully in him who was obedient unto death. He was the example of how we operate in dark days. In the angst of his soul, he's like, God, my God, why have you forsaken me? In the garden, before this all started to happen, the Garden of Gethsemane, the stress was so great. He's like to Peter and the guys, you guys need to pray. And they're like, yeah, okay. They didn't know what was going on. Jesus did. It's a difficult, dark night. This happens in our lives every day. We're in the darkness, we don't know the outcome. We can look back and go like, yeah, why were we so worried? But this story keeps playing on repeat every day. And so we need to consider Jesus. This is what the writers of Hebrews says. Consider him. He endured such opposition from sinners so that you will not grow weary and lose heart. In those dark days when we don't know what the outcome's going to be, we look at Jesus, we consider him, what he did. Jesus didn't shrug it off. Oh, it's easy. I'm fine. I'm good. He didn't do that once. But he was obedient unto death. Gave his life completely into God's hands, fully trusting. The perfect example of faith. But this is our God. When we look at this story, we have to remember this is our God. This is what he does on a continually basis. He takes what is dark, what is broken, bruised, and he makes something beautiful happen out of it. He turned the worst and most vile injustice. Like if you're struggling with that, remember the story. He turned the worst and most vile injustice ever committed into something beautiful, into something that we celebrate once a year and hopefully every day. He turned the darkest day into the brightest one. So much so that we now call this Friday, we call it good. Because this is who our God is. There is nothing too hopeless. So we're cruising into the end. So if this has been, you're kind of like trying to keep your kids in check here. And so listen to this statement. There is nothing too hopeless, too far gone, too impossible for God to redeem. Think of this story. Nothing. Our God isn't tiny and helpless. There is nothing he can't redeem. There is no darkness too deep that the light cannot defeat. And we need to be reminded of that because those dark days are tough. In him was life. And that life was the light of all mankind. The light shines in the darkness, and the darkness has not overcome it.